90% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, and 100% reason to remember the day.
Hey guys, this is Red Bull Q here, as usual, along with
McConnell.
And we're doing a little bit something different than usual because we're going to spend the next, I don't know how long it'll be, maybe 30 minutes, maybe longer, talking about really where the topic is going to be the book Sex at Dawn. But as is typical of discussions that McConnell and I have, I imagine it's going to be a wide-ranging discussion with lots of other topics and other books brought into it. I mean, we already, when we were getting ready for this, we talked about The Selfish Gene a little bit. Oh, no, Sperm Wars.
Yeah.
See, I'm already bringing in other books that we didn't. Anyway, but Sperm Wars, for example, and probably there will be some discussion of the Red Queen. Have you read The Red Queen?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Okay. There's probably going to be some discussion of the Red Queen and The Selfish Gene, which I mentioned accidentally, but am now mentioning on purpose.
Yeah.
So we'll probably have more than a few of these where we discuss specific books because, reading is really important in terms of educating your mind, expanding your mind. Well, one of the things that's interesting is that I spend a lot of time with McConnell and also with Vision, especially talking about thinking and whether we're off on on really.
So all the listeners, we're not actually going to talk about the book today. This is the precursor to talking about the book.
No, we'll talk about it. But we spent a lot of time talking about thinking, and not in the philosophical sense or in the the ontological sense. I believe that's the correct,
I think that's the correct
word. But I mean in the sense of when I'm making decisions in my life, and when I feel certain things which cause me to think in certain ways, are those the right ways I should be thinking and feeling? Because if they're not, then I'm probably making suboptimal decisions for myself, and that's really why, because I think for us, we want to live the best lives possible, and if your mental frameworks are deficient, then you're just not going to think as well as you could.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I think another important part of reading is you open yourself, because you don't know what you don't know, basically. Right. And the more you read, the more options you give yourself. So you should try and read first of all, a wide range of material and a lot of opposing views. And you should spend a lot of time thinking about what you read so that you can make really good decisions, or you can decide which group of ideas best suits you.
Yeah, that's I think a great, and this is one of the reasons why I know these days it's really common, really popular to read all these short articles that are like 5 reasons why you should masturbate with your left hand. but while those articles are really interesting, I actually am quite bored of reading articles. And the reason I'm bored of reading articles is because, just as McConnell was just saying, they don't really give you enough information to give you the opportunity to try on an entirely different framework for thinking and living that books allow you to. There's a richness in depth that books offer, that it's not just, a few simple things that you can change, I started using coconut oil as a lubricant during sex. I mean, that's nice, but and I got that from one of those articles I was talking about. But that's not at the same level as being able to, you look at an entire framework for looking at, my life, or in some aspect, whether that's my dating life, whether that's my sex life, whether that's my career life or whatever. When you try on an entirely different paradigm, then you get a much broader much broader framework for being able to look at whatever it is and a much broader framework that you can draw on when you're making decisions in your life. And there's a guy, oh man, here we go, Charlie Munger, or Munger. I always can't know. Munger is probably not the way it's pronounced, I guess. Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's business partner. For those of you who aren't familiar with Warren Buffett, he's the second richest man in the world. Yeah. And he made all his money through investing, and Charlie Munger is his longtime business partner. And they spend also a lot of time talking about how to think well. And the reason is because their whole making money is about making really good, well thought out decisions. And one of the things that Munger says is, he says, in all these different fields of science especially, but it doesn't only have to be in science. It could be, for example, in poker, which I suppose you could say is mathematics, but anyway, whatever. The point is that there are all these paradigms for looking at and figuring out problems that come from different fields of study, and basically, if we have access to all of those different ways of thinking, then we can apply the best one for our given situation, and that will enhance our ability to come up with an optimal solution to or make an optimal decision for our individual goals. And so books are part of what gives you these various frameworks for looking at things. And the point that McConnell was making a little bit ago about reading a wide variety of sources is important for two reasons. One, because of the variety of thought that you expose yourself to. And in that regard, it's very similar to living in another country where you go to, let's say Japan, and they think very differently from the way we do in the West. But at the same time, you're like, wow, these people are rich too. Wow, these people are living very fulfilling lives. Well, maybe what I thought about how things need to be is different. But it's also important because we suffer from one particular cognitive bias called the confirmation bias. And I don't know, do you want to explain that? Because I've just been talking for a really long time.
Yeah, that's okay. So confirmation bias is basically once you have some idea in your brain and you kind of attach to that idea, you start to search for all this evidence that supports that idea. So
ignore evidence that is counter to your idea. Right.
So you have to be very careful. You have to be aware of that bias, because even when you know about it, you're still probably going to do it. But if you're aware of it, you can at least kind of try and account for that and expose yourself to different information and really spend time sitting down and really thinking about your confirmation bias and whether or not you're kind of feeding it or not. And then there's one of the reasons why I don't really read a whole lot of articles online, like we were talking about before, because when you go to those articles are basically positioned to encourage a lot of confirmation bias. Because some guy who started like masturbating with his left hand is gonna like search Google and he's gonna be like, whoa, maybe I'm weird. And then he's gonna search like, oh, masturbating with left hand. It's gonna be like, oh, 10 reasons why it's great for your self-esteem, and then it's gonna encourage him to keep doing that. Right? So
we're not saying that you shouldn't be masturbating with your left hand. Let's be clear on this. We're just saying that it's an alternative to sitting on your hand until it's numb, sitting on your regular hand until it's numb, and then masturbating with it. Yeah. We're just saying if you want a different experience.
Yeah,
we're in full support.
We're writing an article right now called 10 Different Ways to Masturbate.
but actually, I'm making jokes about this, but in actuality, I do think that there is a detriment to masturbating. It has nothing to do with any religious proclivities, because I don't have any. But it's simply because it is sort of the easy way out of going out and getting like real girls.
Yeah.
So, I do want to say that, but it varies from person to person, right? If you're a person who, you can put sex on one side and masturbation on the other side, and they're just totally different experiences for you, that's great. But if you're using masturbation to replace sex with women because it's easier to do, then, obviously that's quite detrimental if your goal is to be successful with women.
Yeah, and here we go. Another interesting way to look at that is Tyler from RSD, that's Real Social Dynamics. pickup company. Tyler talks about this, and he says that one of the things one of the tricks he uses to pick up more and to increase his motivation is that masturbation is always it's always the reward if he goes out.
Oh yeah,
and it's like his backup plan.
Blue
right?
M does this too,
right?
Or used to.
Yeah, right.
There was a time.
4 score.
For those of you who don't know, Blue M is now married. He has a child on the way. So that's what we're saying. There was a time when he would reward himself for going out and picking up, but probably now.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's. One thing I gotta say, I don't know if you have any married friends, but it's really, really easy to make fun of them.
Yeah, I try to be considerate because it's so easy.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we?
Anyway, on the topic of marriage.
Oh, confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Oh, the topic of marriage.
I was gonna say, we're gonna talk about. I was trying to get us back on track with sex at dawn. But...
Why would you want to do that?
Yeah,
Why we're having fun. We've got 2 rings of the circus going. We're ready to start winding up ring number 3.
I've got my left hand out.
I'm sitting on my right hand. All right.
So anyway, confirmation bias.
Right. So it's very important, really, that if you okay. So let's get this third ring going. The one of the reasons for the massive advancement in technology over the past 1,000 years was the development. Actually, I guess it's more over the past 500 years. Was the development of the scientific method, and the scientific method is basically a way of thinking where your goal is to disconfirm, to find disconfirming evidence, and this is very unnatural for humans to do, which is why it took us millions of years to get to the point where we could do that. I mean, it's a relatively new, invention. I mean, we're still
honing this technology to
right. I mean, which, as if you compare it to, beating people over the head with rocks. I mean, that's been around for, hundreds of thousands of years. Whereas, trying to disconfirm our beliefs is, something that's only been around for a few hundred. And, so because the confirmation bias is so strong, not only is it important that you read or expose yourself to opposing viewpoints, but really you need to inundate yourself with opposing viewpoints because you're not going to learn anything by reading things that you already agree with.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll learn, things that you can use to argue with people to support your own point. But if your goal is to learn rather than to win arguments,
remember
may not be your goal. There's plenty of people who their goal is not to learn something; it is just to win arguments.
Yeah. Yeah. For everyone listening, you probably still think the world is round.
Hopefully you do, but there is a society for the Flat Earth Society.
The Flat Earth Society,
and there are like hundreds of thousands of members or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was just reading. I just read, a couple of months ago. I read Richard Dawkins' The Greatest Show on Earth, and it's about all the evidence for evolution. And in the book, he talks about why he felt the need to write it, and he was saying that. In the U.S., I think there's like 40% of people who still believe that the Earth was created exactly as it says in the Bible, and so he felt that it's really that most scientists, don't think that it's necessary to explain the evidence for evolution because there's so much of it and so little evidence supporting any other theory that it just seems that you wouldn't have to, but they do have to. And speaking of confirmation bias and this whole concept of the scientific method and trying to disconfirm your beliefs rather than confirm them. I try to practice this very regularly. Just last night, I was with McConnell at a place not to be named, and we were talking to a girl that we know, and she mentioned there was a guy there who was very interesting. And And we were, and anyway, she said that he could never hold on to a girlfriend. And after talking to him for, about a minute or so, we could understand why. But the thing that we asked her was, we asked him, how does he do with girls? And she said, oh, yeah, he seems to get a lot of girls. And then we followed up with, are they, what was it?
Are they attractive?
Are they attractive? Right? Because if that guy is getting girls that are attractive, then I would want to spend more time with him and find out exactly what he's doing, because in my mind he's doing everything wrong.
Yeah.
And but I want to figure out, are there people who are doing things totally differently from me who are absolutely out there killing it? When I say killing it, I mean getting the results that I want.
Yeah.
And I'm always, and instead of just looking at that guy and being like, yeah, I bet they're all ugly, I'd rather actually find out if they really are.
Yeah, that's really important. When you see people out there who are, who may or may not be getting results, you just don't know. You don't, based on your first impression of somebody, like this guy we saw last night. I probably wouldn't spend any amount of time with him, really. In like normal life, I wouldn't want to talk to him probably. But
except for humorous purposes.
Yeah, for humor purposes, yeah. But there's a good chance that he's actually getting results, right? And I just don't know. You should never judge somebody by your first impression of them. You always
even though you always will.
Yeah, even though you always will. You should always separate you should always separate the way that you feel about a person versus the results they're getting.
Right.
And try and look at what they're doing well, and then take that and use it for yourself. And this is kind of a concept that a lot of NLP guys talk about, and Milton
for
Erickson.
People who don't know NLP, maybe.
NLP is neuro-linguistic programming, which is basically just using language to change your beliefs or to to kind of change your models of the world, sort of. And obviously by using language, you can gradually have your mind adapt to new paradigms and shifts and whatnot. So it kind of stems from hypnosis, and a lot of hypnotists are also NLP advocates. So
and I would like to say that just for those of you, many of you might be familiar with Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
Anthony, he basically what he's doing is also NLP, although he calls it something different, but it's NLP.
Right. And and obviously for old school pickup guys, Ross Jeffries uses a lot of NLP. But what I was saying is that one of the things that a lot of NLP practitioners encourage is this thing called modeling, where you look at people who are getting the results you want, regardless of the person and their personality. Look at the results they're getting, and then look at what they're doing to get those results, and then just do what they're doing.
Yeah.
Just model them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway.
So maybe now it's time to circle back to the topic at hand.
Yeah. Nested loops. This is another NLP thing. Just
it is
going deeper and deeper without closing.
Okay, so Sex at Dawn. So first of all, we should kick off by just explaining that Sex at Dawn is basically a book that falls into the evolutionary psychology genre. And the other books that we listed early in the beginning, including Selfish Gene, Sperm Wars, and The Red Queen, are all evolutionary psychology books. Now, you're probably familiar with a lot of, whether you've read any of these books or not, you're familiar with a lot of the concepts, because those concepts are a part of certainly Western culture at this point, and are often discussed in a lot of those articles we were talking about that we don't like, when they talk about ways, 6 ways to make your relationship better or something. They often draw on these ideas that from evolutionary psychology. So the first thing we probably should do is give an overview of what the authors of Sex at Dawn call the standard narrative, just in case you're not fully familiar with it. So the standard narrative essentially looks at the way humans are today and assumes that the way that we are is kind of the way we've always been. So that means that the belief that humans are monogamous. So this is one of the crux of the standard narrative, is that humans are naturally monogamous, and any non-monogamy is sort of cheating, or is like a devious thing to do, where you're taking advantage or winning over other people by using sort of these negative techniques, dark side techniques. And so that's the beginning. And, you'll see when you look at research, at least previously, there was a lot of research where people would then go, biologists would then go and they would look at other animals in nature and say, oh yeah, see, we're not the only ones that are monogamous. There are these other animal species that are also monogamous. But as it turns out, there are, I think, only one, or maybe there's not even any at all. I can't remember.
There's one, but they're very far from humans in terms of...
It's some kind of bird?
No. There's gibbons, part of the great apes.
Oh, okay. And gibbons are monogamous for life?
Yeah, they're monogamous. I don't know if for life. I can't remember exactly, but they're monogamous. But they're so far from humans in terms of behavior, and also just in terms of like the evolutionary kind of map. I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, I don't know. The evolutionary
hierarchy or
tree.
Evolutionary tree, yeah.
I believe is the way it works, because it looks at
branches
exactly, out in different ways.
Yeah. So their gibbons are quite far from humans on the evolutionary tree.
Okay.
And they are monogamous, but there's all, and then so you can read Sex at Dawn, and it talks about why gibbons are very different from humans, and if humans were built to be monogamous, they would probably closer resemble gibbons or other monogamous animals.
Yeah, we'll get into the biology, I think, a little bit later after we finish with the standard narrative.
Yeah.
Okay, so the standard narrative is that humans are naturally monogamous, and and also that while we are naturally monogamous, there are some people that violate this naturalness because there is some evolutionary advantage. So there is some remnant of this in our genes that makes it so that there's a small percentage of people who will sort of break the rules because there is just enough of an edge to be gained that it hasn't been totally snuffed out, essentially.
Right.
So that means things like, okay, so as a male, your goal is to have a monogamous relationship with one woman and invest a lot of your resources into the offspring from that one woman, while simultaneously trying to impregnate as many other women on the side who you don't have to take care of. And hopefully, if you're extremely lucky, then you'll be able to cuckold multiple other men, where those men think that they're raising their own children when they're actually raising yours. Right. So that's kind of I would say, the crux of the male side.
Yeah, the male side. Yeah.
And the crux of the female side is that women have to be very careful about who they mate with, because they can only have a certain number of children.
A certain number of chances to have children.
Right, a certain number of that's right, a certain number of chances. Maybe they have, like, at the outside edge, like 15 kids at the high end, whereas a man can have hundreds. There's one sheik who has like 526 kids or something.
Yeah,
he has like this whole harem.
Yeah, but he's not even close to Genghis Khan.
Oh, right. Well, let's not get started with Genghis. I mean, yeah. Anyway, all right. Let's stop. Okay. So so because women are can only have 15, unlike men can basically indiscriminately have sex with whoever they want, and that's why men are less discriminating about who they have sex with, whereas women are more discriminating because there's a higher cost, because every time they have a child with one person, that means that's one less child they can have with somebody else, but also because there is high levels of investment from that woman naturally, because she has to carry the child for 9 months, and so women are very careful about who they mate with as a result, and so their imperative is to secure one man who has lots of resources to raise the child, and that during their most fertile periods, they may be more inclined to sneak off and get impregnated by the male who has more higher testosterone indicators. So testosterone indicators mean a squarer jawline. I don't know, what are some of the other ones?
Alpha.
Yeah.
Being the alpha male.
Right, being the alpha male. So maybe the guy who won't be there to take care of her, but he's like at the high top of the social hierarchy. So he presumably has better genes, and so she might sneak off with that guy when she's most likely to ovulate. But really, her main imperative is to maintain her close relationship with this one guy who's going to be the quote-unquote provider male and take care of her and take care of her kids.
And we should reiterate that this is the standard narrative of evolutionary psychology, and this is what Sex at Dawn is countering. They're providing a counter-argument to this this description that we just gave you.
And I want to emphasize that when we are discussing these books, it doesn't necessarily mean that I myself or McConnell have a particular perspective. I shouldn't say we don't have particular beliefs necessarily one way or the other. We are open to looking at the evidence and, more importantly, thinking about what does this maybe mean in terms of how I'm going to make my life decisions. So whether the standard narrative is true or whether what they talk about in Sex at Dawn is true or not, is pretty relevant. We don't care. It doesn't make us angry if one is more true than the other. It's not like I'm going to be like, those terrible women trying to cuckold me. It's it's whatever. It's what it is. And that's and whatever is and it's really just an attempt to reach a better understanding of what's happening in the world and what's happening between men and women, and not an attempt to figure out, to be upset about the way things are or the way things might be or whatever.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to maintain an open mind. That's what we're trying to do as well. We don't have the answers. We're just reading and talking about some of the possibilities.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about I don't know, was there anything you wanted to add about the standard narrative?
No, it's pretty thorough. And also, if you guys want to get a nice overview of the standard narrative and read more about it, you can read books like The Red Queen and Sperm Wars. And actually, those two books kind of have a mixed outlook. Like, Sperm Wars talks about a lot of things that Sex at Dawn actually talks about, but not at the level of depth that Sex at Dawn goes into them.
Right. Or they frame a lot of the things they talk about as fitting into the standard narrative.
Right. When actually these things might not fit into that narrative.
Right.
So, but I highly recommend those books. I think Sperm Wars was the first evolutionary psychology book that I read.
Oh, really? That must have been mind-blowing.
Yeah, it was crazy.
How old were you when you read that?
I read that when I was 17, I think.
Oh, okay. So not too early.
Yeah.
I could see that permanently damaging a 14-year-old.
Yeah. I read the Female Brain before that, and I thought that was a really good book. If you guys want a good book on the female brain, go read The Female Brain. I'll get the author and we will put it in the page where you're listening to this audio. So that book was really good because it talks about the way that women's brains evolve from birth until through their entire life and what changes. So that's highly recommended. And Sperm Wars also highly recommended because it sort of changes the way that you'll look at relationships. That was the first big book where I came away from reading it and I was like, oh, relationships really aren't what I thought they were.
Yeah, I think especially one of the key aspects to realize is that one of the parts of the standard narrative that is heavily emphasized, because the way that I just explained it was very neutral, but part of the standard narrative as it is done, especially in the Western world, is essentially to say that women are good because women are trying to raise children and have a strong family, and men are bad because men are trying to randomly impregnate lots of women.
Right.
And I think and essentially that men are like lying to women and doing bad things so that they can essentially have the opportunity to leave her with a child and he can move on to the next woman, and this is bad. I think it's very important to understand that there is, in the standard narrative, there is, I would say, a pretty heavy anti-male bias in the standard narrative. And actually, while we're at it, why don't we take a moment to beat down on monogamy for a little bit here? I don't remember exactly where I read this. Maybe it was in Marriage: A History. Have you read Marriage: A History?
I haven't read that yet.
Okay, well, Marriage: A History is also a really fascinating book. And okay, and in Marriage of History, one of the I think it might be that. But anyway, what they talk about is we typically believe that monogamy is beneficial to women and not beneficial to men. And actually, this is talked about in that book that book on the history of Islam that you recommended to me.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, also...
That book is called No God But God. It's on the history of Islam, so it's also a very good book.
Not very relevant for our discussion, except for this one bit, which is something that you see in several ancient societies, and that is essentially that during war times, men could, or societies that tended to have a lot of war, seem to embrace polygamy quite openly. And it's pretty obvious that the reason is because when lots of men are dead, then the women are left with no one. And that brings me to another, what book was that where they talk about how, oh yes, what's good about men, how cultures flourish by exploiting men. Right. Yes. So this is also an excellent book. And so what depth? So this book is the one that I'm talking about. And it talks about how the belief is that monogamy is good for women. And oh right. So the first part I wanted to bring out is that in societies where there's a lot of war, polygamy is generally much more accepted, and that's just because. With the structure of society now, usually men are the ones who are accumulating more of the wealth, and so by letting them have multiple women, it means that women are not destitute and left on the street. And in that book, he talks about how in Russia, after World War II, millions and millions of Russian men died, and because of that, there weren't enough men to go around, and how important it is that a society has lots and lots of men, because men are necessary for competing with other cultures, right? I mean, one of the reasons why, for example, China is so incredibly powerful is because they've got 1.4 billion people. So, if they want to do anything, whether that's, launch a war or whether that's build a company, they have so many people they can draw on, which is a huge resource, that it makes it hard for other countries to compete with them. So, and the number of people you have is constrained by the number of women you have. Mm-hmm. Because women can only have whatever number, 10, 15 children in a lifetime, and so if you wipe out 50% of the women in your society, you're now down to having the next generation, whereas if you cut out half of the men,
another China problem.
Yeah. But if you cut out half the men, then basically all the men can just double up, and now you're doing fine in terms of the next generation having plenty of people. Okay, now the reason I was bringing this up is because I wanted to bash a little bit on monogamy. Once again, I'm not against monogamy in any way, shape, or form. I mean, if you, and when I say you, that means me, also, if I'm totally happy with one woman for the rest of my life, then that's great. It means I'm totally happy. But if I'm not totally happy, then that's fine too. I don't think monogamy is good and any other configuration is bad. It's good if it works for you, and it's bad if it doesn't.
Yeah, and you should always really evaluate if things are actually working for you, or if you actually just believe they're working for you. Right? So you always want to ask the question of whether or not what you're doing is actually making you happy, and is actually providing the results you really want. Mm-hmm. And also another thing is never kind of restrain yourself and think, I'm doing it this way, and I wish I could do it the other way, but that's impossible. Because that's often really a very limiting belief that can be overcome.
Yeah. And so the example of how monogamy is really good for women and is bad for women and good for men is essentially to say that if you have approximately equal numbers of men and women, which we do, And if and you order them from most to least desirable. Now, obviously, this is not going to be perfect, but let's just say you can order them from least to most desirable. Then there's going to be the top male, the second male, the third, et cetera, and there's going to be the top female, the second female, the third female, et cetera. Now, if you have monogamy and you line up 100 women next to 100 men and they're ranked from 1 to 100, then the number 1 guy is going to be with the number 1 girl, number 2 guy with number 2 girl, all the way down to the number 100 guys with the number 100 girl. Now, if we take, let's say if we allow everybody to have 2 wives, then suddenly guys 51 through 100 have no women, and every woman is with a better man except for the woman at the top, who has to share her guy with the woman number 2. But basically, everybody else is better off. And there is a lot of evidence to say that when you have a lot of single males, you have a lot of social unrest. And there is a lot of discussion about how this is one of the problems in the Middle East at the moment. And so you can easily see with that simple thought experiment that essentially monogamy is better for men than for women. And so there's a theory that that monogamy was really something that was designed by essentially by men, so that there would be more stable societies by allowing everybody to be able to wife up.
Yeah.
And so there you go. That's my bashing of monogamy. Once again, I'm not really against monogamy, but I'm really against the idea that society's put across that monogamy is bad, that polygamy is bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, shall we continue on with our discussion of
Sex at Dawn? What was this about Sex at Dawn? Yeah.
Right. So let's. So where do we want to go with next with our discussion of Sex at Dawn? We sort of talked about the standard narrative. Oh, maybe we should talk about the underlying biology or the hunter-gatherer overview. Which
let's talk about the hunter-gatherer overview.
Okay.
First of all.
Cool. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So one of the big points that Sex at Dawn makes, they basically do this historical overview of societies and how human society has developed and the changes in terms of mating that has caused. And one of the very important things that they look at is how human mating changed after the invention of agriculture, basically. Because once we had agriculture, the way that human societies were structured it was fundamentally changed. Because all of a sudden people could just stay in the same place, and they didn't, and it became much more difficult to manage their resources.
And much more easier to accumulate wealth.
Right. So, whereas in if you contrast that with hunter-gatherer societies, there was a much less work needed to be done to find their food and resources. Right.
Didn't they say it's just like 4 hours a day of work for hunter-gatherers?
Yeah, I think it's even less than that, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because there's some days where they're not doing anything.
Okay.
Right. It's in short spurts of work. Mm-hmm. And then after that, they just have lots of free time. And so after post-agrarian human societies, you can accumulate massive amounts of wealth, and with that, massive amounts of status, and you can stay in a single place, so you can run, and also you can basically expose yourself to more people. Because hunter-gatherer societies, they were basically, they might run into other tribes at some point, but for the most part, they're just interacting with their main group of people,
which would be somewhere between like 50 to 200 people.
Yeah. So one of the points that the authors make is that human relationships were much different in hunter-gatherer society, which is pretty much the way that humans were for most of their development up until modern times, basically. Well, I guess you could say agriculture, which is most of what we know of the known history, sort of.
5,000-6,000 years ago.
Yeah. So, and in Sex at Dawn, they talk about how the common misconception is that, oh, these hunter-gatherer societies must have been the same because X or because Y, and they draw on all these kind of all this sort of misinformation in the scientific community about why hunter-gatherer societies must have been monogamous. And in the research that these authors do, they examine how it was almost impossible that these hunter-gatherer societies could have been monogamous. And so the lens that they're sort of looking at evolutionary psychology through is, okay, let's look at the way that humans were originally. Let's look at the way they were in prior to all of this technology, all this innovation, prior to what we know as human history, and use that as the kind of baseline to examine human relationships. And also, they also look at where all this misinformation comes from about, human civilization prior to agriculture. So there's a lot of misinformation. One of the core sources that they look at is Thomas Hobbes. And in Thomas Hobbes' book Leviathan, he talks about how mankind in a natural state, I guess he calls it a state of nature, right?
Yeah, state of nature.
State of nature is it was like brutal and violent and
short.
Very short. Your life, your lifespan was very, very short. And he's describing this sort of, this like gruesome life that can only be solved by, what we know as, modern civilization and modern government and modern agriculture and all these things. And the authors go, the authors of Sex at Dawn, I should say, go, okay, well, what if we look at hunter-gatherers? Hunter-gatherer tribes are still around today. Or hunter-gatherer tribes that were operating
in recent history.
In
modern times.
Right. They don't actually... Their life looks nothing like...
I believe it was nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah, nasty, brutish, and short. Right, yeah. Right. So these hunter-gatherers who they looked at from recent history or modern times, their life was nothing like that. It didn't look anything like what Thomas Hobbes described. And yet, that book, Leviathan, is taken as being this... definitive outlook on what human life must have been like, and the common reaction to books like that is, oh, we're so fortunate to be living in this time when we don't have to deal with a violent life.
Yeah.
When in reality, life probably wasn't all that. It was quite peaceful because you didn't have to deal with warfare because you had no territory to defend. You were just a mobile tribe that was going, and there were plenty of resources for you because remember, world population was very, very low up until kind of recorded history, and even then human population was still low until 200 to 300 years ago. So we can't look at ancient life through the same lens that we look at modern life because they're two very different things. And Sex at Dawn goes into amazing depth on this. And I'm sure I'm omitting a lot of interesting stuff.
Maybe you could mention some of the things I think the one of the most important things they say about the nature of hunter-gatherer society is that it was very communal.
Right, and they were sharing everything.
Right, that sharing was very normal. So in the example of they I don't know if this is in Sex at Dawn, but they were taught there's hunters. Always share whatever they catch. And the reason why they do that is because, some days you catch something and it's more, and you can't store food. So since you can't store it, there's no reason to hoard it. In the hunter-gatherer times, you can't. Obviously, that's what I mean. I don't mean today. So you can't store the food. So since you can't store it, you might as well share it. And by sharing it with others, it also means that when other people are successful in the hunt and you're not, they will share with you. So sharing is very is typical. Whereas maybe in modern times it isn't. Where there's a lot of benefits to hoarding because we can store things for a long period of time, and isn't necessarily a lot of benefit in sharing because even if you do share, that doesn't mean that someone else will share with you later on. But in the hunter-gatherer world, that is normal, and the idea of something of something being your possession is much more has a much more flexible meaning than what it means to us. It reminds me of do you remember that did you ever see that movie The Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is a really great example. And in that movie, if you haven't seen it, and you're not required to watch it, by the way, but basically this airplane is flying over some remote part of Africa and drops this Coke bottle, this old style glass Coca-Cola bottle, and it's the only one. And so, it's the first time that there is like something in that tribe that is scarce. And because there's this something in this tribe that is scarce, there starts to be a lot of conflict between the members of that tribe to use this one item that is there's only one of them that no one can create. And the story is about this one of the tribesmen, the leader of the tribe maybe, who basically needs to dispose of this Coke bottle. So because it's ripping apart the tribal structures by creating this item that is so scarce that people can't share it, and by not being able to share it, it's causing great rifts and tension and conflict in their tribe that weren't there previously.
And of course, like a lot of the humor is that it's totally useless. There's nothing they can do with it, right?
Yeah.
So So that discussion about scarcity being a modern kind of invention is very interesting, and one of the ways they illustrate this in Sex at Dawn is they profile this one I guess more traditional group. I can't remember if they're strictly hunter-gatherers, but they're quite close, and they talk about how one of the mating rituals is the women at night. They have, I guess it's like at regular intervals, they have this sort of ritual. And the women have to go. There's a group of women in the society, and they have to go. Each woman has to go find a man that they're choosing to mate with. And when they find their man, all the men who have been picked gather together and they go hunting. And each man has to bring home. So the point of the ritual is that if a man can bring back food, then he gets to mate with the woman. But the interesting thing about it is that the men all go hunting together. And then before they go back to the village, they meet each other at some sort of like rendezvous point. And they all equally distribute their findings so that even the men who weren't able to get any food can come back with something. So everyone ends up mating, right, with the girl who had chosen them. And that's sort of very illustrative of what hunter-gatherer societies are sort of like, where everything is communal and everything is shared. And sharing is highly encouraged.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's highly encouraged because only by working together can they really survive, because you can't accumulate enough resources. I think the example they give is that you can't store food in your own refrigerator, so you're storing it in your friend's stomach.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Right.
And of course, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that I think is kind of one of the main things, that the idea that things are shared and that things are communal is one of the underlying, the foundational points of Sex at Dawn, in terms of how people also look at sex, or how they believed sex was looked at traditionally among humans.
Right.
But if you wanted to say something,
yeah, I was just going to basically say the same thing that you just said, where this communal spirit kind of dips over. It goes outside of just resources, and it goes into the way that human interaction happens in a very communal way. And there's a lot of very interesting case studies of the mating practices and in interpersonal relationships in sort of hunter-gatherer societies or more traditional societies, even in pretty recent history. And one of the case studies that kind of was most interesting to me is that one from China, from rural China.
Oh yeah, the Hmong people or something.
No, Mosuo. I've been probably mispronouncing that, so we can put a thing on the page.
Right, because there's a Wikipedia link.
Yeah, Mosuo, and so the Mosuo people are very interesting because the way that they've structured their society, and I guess I don't know if it's still this way today.
It is.
Yeah, but the way that their society is structured is very I guess it's sort of like a matriarchy.
I don't know if it's structured as a matriarchy in all areas. But anyway, we can focus on the way they structure their families. Right.
So the way that the families are structured is that a woman lives with her brothers and with her, I guess, with her whole family, but specifically her brothers are living in her home, and each woman gets to go out and take as many sexual partners as they want, other men. And when she becomes pregnant and gives birth, the child is not cared for by the man who impregnated her. It's cared for by the woman's brothers. So each family is responsible for their sisters, for the female, the young female in the family. Her brothers and her parents, I guess, are responsible for caring for the child. And so the men who impregnate the women are also brothers to some women, and they're responsible for caring for their sisters' children. So this is obviously very different from the way that we look at parenting in modern society. But if you really think about it, it makes a lot of sense that they would do it that way.
I just want to make sure that, because I've just that it's very clear. So the way it works is that when a woman becomes of age, she gets her in that culture. She gets her own room, her own private room, and that private room has a separate entrance.
Right.
And the way that works is that she can then choose who can come to her to share her bed with her. And the men who come are supposed to come after dark and leave before morning. So that really only she knows who she's having sex with.
Right.
And that can mean that she's having sex with different people, or it can mean that she's having sex with the same person.
But neither is encouraged or discouraged
by
the society.
Right. And so any children that she has are raised by her and her brothers who she lives with in the same house. Although it seems the brothers don't have their own room because they don't need it.
Right.
So the family unit is women, their children, and their brothers. And the brothers play the father role for her children and not the sperm donor.
Right. So this is sort of interesting because it's a totally different way of looking at parenting. Whereas in most modern societies, we look at the actual sperm donor, right, as being that is the father. And to most people, that's true. And most people, if you told them this story, it would be crazy to them, right? Because it's not the way that they've operated. They've been told that society is supposed to operate,
or that society can operate.
Right. But clearly, this society has worked, right? And like you were talking about, you made a comparison to Japan before, where Japanese people do things very differently from the way that we do them in the West, but they're still doing just fine.
Right.
So there's a lot of these very interesting case studies in Sex at Dawn where there's all these societies that are doing things differently, or were doing things differently, even up into recent history, completely differently from the way that we think of most post-agrarian societies, and everything was totally fine.
Yeah. I think and let's just draw into the selfish gene very briefly to talk about this phenomena, because I would say that overall selfish gene is pretty agnostic about how societies are actually structured. The selfish gene basically says that we meaning not just we as humans, but all creatures are what he calls gene machines, and that we are designed to pass on our genes. And there are lots of different ways to do that, and a lot of human behavior can be easily explained, and not only human behavior, animal behavior can be explained when you look at it from that perspective. So, for example, one of the ones that he talked about is altruism. It's like, well, why does altruism exist? Why would you help strangers? But he says that in a tribe, for example, everyone in a tribe shares a large percentage of their genes. So we have this we have this mechanism where people who are close to us, we want to do things for them without getting anything immediately in return, because we were biologically evolved in environments where other people that were close to us had similar genes.
Right.
Okay, so when you look at it in the way that we look at it in Western society, especially, is that we should have that whoever is the father and mother need to raise children because they are the biologically closest to that child, and so they're going to care for the child better than other people would. And in the example we have, and that creates some problems. One of the problems is that if you're a guy, or when I say problems, I mean what society considers to be problems. So, for example, if you're a guy and you have one child, and then you can find out later on that your child isn't actually yours and it's somebody else's, and I believe research tends to find that about 20% of children are raised by who they think is their biological father isn't actually their father. Ha ha. So he points out in this book that I don't know if it's probably in the selfish gene, but or it's Sex at Dawn rather, points out that this example that we're talking about, where the children are raised by the mother and her brothers, eliminates this possibility, because they know that no matter what, the child that they're raising has at least 25% of their gene pool inside that child. So their investment is definitely not being wasted. Whereas, from that perspective, it could be wasted if you believe in monogamy, or if you're doing things in a monogamous way, but you are unknowingly, you're not in a monogamous situation. Yeah. So that's so it's interesting, because essentially what they've done is they've solved a problem in a different way. The traditional Western way is, well, let's force monogamy, especially on women. Let's control their movements, constrain their sexuality. And by doing that, we can be certain of our paternity and therefore our investment. Whereas the people in this one Chinese culture say, look, let's not worry about that. Let's just have it so that people are 100% assured that they are raising their own relatives, but it's not their direct descendants.
Yeah.
Well, in the case of men, in the case of women, obviously they know what child comes out of their womb. Okay, great. So anything else about the hunter-gatherer, or should we move into talking about biology?
Yeah, we can talk about biology.
All right, let's talk about biology. Woo! Okay, so whenever it's interesting, because the facts that they cite in Sex at Dawn are that they use to support their point are exactly the same facts that are used to support the traditional perspective. Now, so the first one that I want to highlight is about the difference in male bodies versus other primates, in humans, males' bodies versus other primates. So one of the key, when you look at gorillas versus chimpanzees, who have very different mating strategies. The mating strategy for the gorillas are big, much bigger than the females, and the reason is because they have harems, and so they beat up all of the other males and keep them away, and then that's how they maintain access to their females. Part of their job is to protect the offspring of the women, the females that they impregnate, and that's part of their role, because other males will kill them. And so gorillas have, relative to their size, have very, 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 very small, tiny testicles, and that's because they don't need to. When they're mating, they have their female all to themselves, and it doesn't take many copulations. I think it's like 3 or 4 or something like that for impregnation to happen. Right. Yeah. 3 or 4 for impregnation to happen. So they're not required to have much sperm to get the job done, as it were.
Yeah.
Now they contrast that with chimpanzees, who have, relative to their body size, huge testicles, larger than ours are as humans, relative to our body size. And the role of testicles is, as they call in Sex at Dawn, it's like a spare beer fridge in the garage.
Yeah.
I love that metaphor.
Yeah, it's really funny.
And they say basically, if you have a really large beer fridge in the garage, you're probably the kind of person who's expecting a party to break out at any moment.
Yeah.
And chimpanzees seem to have sort of a continuous orgy society.
Yeah.
Where multiple men are mating, multiple males are mating with multiple females throughout. And what this means is that instead of monopolizing access to a female and in her reproductive cycle, they share access to her. And instead of chimpanzees fighting it out outside of the womb, or outside of the room in the womb in the physical, anyway, you know what I mean. They leave it to the sperm to fight it out inside the female's vaginal tract. Is that reproductive tract?
Yeah.
And because of that, there are various different types of sperm. I don't know. Do you want to talk about the types of sperm? Do you want me to do that?
If I could. You can
Okay.
Talk.
Okay, so essentially, this is discussed extensively in Sperm Wars, and they basically say there's 3 types of sperm. So, sperm ages in your testicles. And I believe there's like the part that, anyways, I believe it's called the epididymis, which is the sperm is produced in the testicles themselves, and it's stored in the epididymis, which is the tubes leading out of the scrotum into the prostate and past the prostate into the urethra, where it can then be ejaculated into whatever orifice you prefer. All right.
Or the wall.
Or the wall. Yeah. Now, the sperm that is that's the newer sperm performs a different role. So there's like, let's just say new, middle, and old. Let's just leave it at that. But essentially, the newest sperm, it has chemicals that seek out other foreign sperm and destroy them in some way.
Well, actually, you shouldn't say new, middle, and old, because I don't think it has as much to do with the age of the sperm. It has more to do with just what is ejaculated first.
Okay.
Right. So what when male ejaculates, the first spurt of sperm is going to have these chemicals, and it's going to shoot further, right, than the other ones.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's
which
what
you've
makes
probably experienced.
Yeah. You could do this test at home if you want.
right, with your left hand or after you sit on your right hand, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, there's many different ways to do them all.
But
science.
that's okay. Yeah. So but anyway, the point is that there are 3 different types of sperm. One is what in Sperm Wars they call the egg getter. No, what they call the killer sperm, which are designed to seek out and destroy or incapacitate the sperm, a foreign sperm, presumably from other males. It has the egg getter sperm, which is designed actually to impregnate women, and it has the the defensive sperm, which is designed to gum up the works, as it were.
Yeah.
So that they fight a rear guard action, so that any followers have to break through before they can get to the target, and so that the fact that there are these different types of sperm imply that they exist because there were multiple types of multiple sperm from different males in this reproductive tract at any given time, and so they were sort of duking it out.
Right, and we wouldn't have we wouldn't have this. We wouldn't have evolved to have this if that wasn't the case.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And and another thing that is related to this is that if you look at the design of the human penis, the design is sick. Basically, it's just like really crazy. So it is designed to actually pull other sperm out when having sex.
That good plunger action.
Yeah, the plunger action. Yeah. And I guess the authors of Sex at Dawn did a test of this, and they found that actually quite a lot of sperm was pulled out during intercourse. So
the phalanged head,
phalanged head, yeah,
of the penis is designed to scrape the walls of the vagina for any loose sperm.
Yeah.
Pull it out.
Yeah. So think about that next time you have sex. Sex is a lot similar to raking the garden than you think.
Absolutely, cleaning out the weeds.
Yeah.
Making sure nothing foreign grows there.
So next time, this will give you a whole different frame of reference. Next time you're having sex, you could just be like, "I'm winning. I'm calling it all out. I'm winning." And then another interesting thing about the different types of sperm that are ejaculated, during the course of a standard ejaculation, one of the reasons why it's designed that way, like we said briefly earlier, is because it accounts for the fact that there's probably different sperm in the vagina during intercourse, right? Or it's assumed biologically, it's assumed that that's the case. And there's a lot of other evidence that suggests that this is naturally biologically what happened with humans. And one of these is how vocal the females are.
Oh, right.
During sex.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, I guess, one of the reasons that the authors of Sex at Dawn give for why females are vocal during sex is that it's to attract other male partners to come mate with her. Because usually, women, actually, this is a very common kind of joke or stereotype in media, where men just finish really quickly and women are like left waiting for more. And this is because actually, evolutionarily, this is exactly what happened. Women could have a lot more sex than men were able to give them. And one of the reasons for...
Than any one man was able to give them.
Than any one man was able to give them, right. And one of the reasons for this, for men not being optimized for having long sex for long durations, is because if there were other men coming, and there probably were, I don't mean that in the other men arriving on the scene, which they probably were because the female was being very vocal.
Ambulance sirens running. Yeah. There's an emergency.
So because the female
get in there quick before the fire goes out.
Yeah.
Get in there while the heat is on.
Yeah. So while the female was being very vocal, that's sort of maybe attracting these other men, and so the man who's having intercourse with her at that moment, he should be finishing quickly so that he can leave.
And
avoid,
go find the next woman.
Right, and go find the next woman, and also avoid conflict with other men who are coming.
Mm-hmm. One of the things the authors say that really struck me was they go, in the wild, animals do not have sexual problems. Right. They don't have sexual dysfunction.
Right.
And and so when you see dysfunction in humans, then it implies that we're going counter to our natural tendencies and our natural biology, which I thought, I was like, oh wow. And so they point out that it really, if you look at our culture today, basically and there's a TED Talk which I'll also link to, where he early on he says, how many of you have heard, a couple having sex? And pretty much everybody raised their hand. And he says, when that couple was having sex, how many of you heard the woman being louder than the man? And pretty much everybody raised their hand. And if you look at our culture today, that really doesn't make any sense. Because why would women make a lot of noise during sex? I mean, generally speaking, when you listen to what you hear about females having sex, what you hear is that they have pretty unexciting sex lives where sex doesn't really feel all that great, but yet they're still more vocal than men. And so the explanation is, and the explanation isn't just something they just pulled out of their ass. The explanation is based on looking at other animals where the female is more vocal than the male. And in other animals where the female is more vocal than the male, that's what's happening. The woman is making noise, and it's, basically saying, hey, come on, guys, I'm ready to go. Yeah. Let's get it on. Yeah. And that's, and because of that, I guess they always say, in the book, and certainly in other sources also, they say that it takes an average of a woman, an average of like 20 minutes to have an orgasm, whereas it takes a man about 7. Yeah. So, that really means she needs about 3 guys before she can have can have an orgasm. And, so this conflict, I guess you could say, that exists in the modern world between men trying to satisfy their woman and women needing to and women being satisfied is eliminated under those circumstances. Now, in the traditional narrative of what they say is that, and I think this is, I can't remember, this is maybe in this might be in the Red Queen. They basically use the fact that men have to, that human males have to learn how to please women sexually, and it takes time and skill, as evidence for to say that men who are able to sexually please women are going to be more successful reproductively, because they're going to have more offspring, because women will offer them more sex. And in Sperm Wars, they talk about how women who, when they have orgasms, are more likely to become pregnant because of various changes in the reproductive tract, the female reproductive tract. And, for one of them, the cervix opens wider, and if the cervix is wider, then sperm can more easily enter the womb, and then they can to swim up to meet the egg as it passes from the ovaries through the fallopian tube and out. So they explain it that way, right? That traditional narrative is saying, hey, there are returns to men for being skilled at sex, and by being skilled, they're more likely to have offspring, and so that persists. Which, once again, I don't have a position on this stuff. It's just, it just seems to me, when I read that, it seems like a kind of a more convoluted explanation, for one. And secondly, the fact that, based on the way human societies are designed historically, or have ended up functioning historically, really a male's prowess at sex, not really very important. Yeah. Because men essentially controlled. When I say controlled, I don't mean like they were slaves, but I mean we're secured is better by skills. There's 2 females by accumulating resources. Right. So if you look at kings, or if you look at modern sheikhs in the Middle East, or pretty much any sort of nobility anywhere, especially prior to Christianity. Essentially, they secured access to females, not by either through force or through accumulation of resources. And so, the idea that, there was this sort of rogue contingent of men who had this other way around, solving this problem, which was by being good at sex, and women, and all women developed certain traits to be able to favor that. Once again, I'm not saying it's not possible, but, it doesn't seem to play out much. Right. Now, having said that, having said that, there are a lot of hunter-gatherer cultures that do prize sexual prowess in men, and they don't have they don't use the sort of more modern quote unquote methods of securing access to females. It's partially because women are free to choose their sexual partners purely by their sexual prowess, that becomes important. If women aren't free to choose their partners based on sexual prowess alone, which has been very uncommon because most women were either not supposed to be sexually active before marriage, so they wouldn't know. Although I guess someone could argue, well, once they had access to that woman, then if they pleased her sexually, then they could have more children than if they didn't. But the evidence doesn't really support that. I mean, the old close your eyes and think of England is, as they would say to women in England about, doing their wifely duties of opening their legs, implies that, clearly there were other reasons why they should be having kids that had nothing to do with their own pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about...
we were just discussing the biology.
Oh, right, the biology. So we started talking about the testicles and the relative size of them. What was...
The penis design.
The penis design. Oh, right,
Yeah.
the penis design. Oh, there's the other factor, which is the relative size of males and females.
Right.
So I pointed out already that gorillas are far larger than the females, and that's because they're optimized for competition with other men. Whereas when you have females and males that are very similar, it means that there is...
similar in height.
Similar in height only? In size.
Yeah.
What did I say?
You said similar, and I was clarifying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got my back there.
Yeah.
When they're similar in size, body size, then it means that there is relatively less or very little competition among males.
Right.
Additionally, there is when males and or females are highly differentiated from one another, not in terms of size but in terms of other things. For example, the classic peacock example. Yeah. The reason why males have huge have this huge plume of feathers and females are almost identical to one another means that there is a high level of male competition for females. And another example would be with like antlers, and where the males have huge antlers and the females don't. That tends to mean that there is a one side. What is it? A one side take all? Wait, no. What is the term for that type of competition? Winner take all.
Winner take all. Yeah.
There we go. It's sort of a winner take all situation where where the males are competing in some way, and it doesn't have to be in the case of the gorilla where it's purely like through fighting, although it often is. In the peacock, another example. Okay, let me give another example, which is there's a bird where the males compete by building these really elaborate. Elaborate nests, essentially, and they're supposed to be extremely ornamental, and I don't understand the aesthetic preferences of this particular type of bird, or really any bird for that matter. So, but they compete by building nests that are aesthetically pleasing to women. So.
Next podcast is the aesthetics of birds.
The aesthetics of birds.
Why you should...
5 reasons why understanding the aesthetics of birds will help you draw a woman into your own love nest. But yeah, so whenever males and and it can go both ways. There are some instances where women try and differentiate themselves, although none come to mind. There are instances, and so in the human world, men and women are not all that differentiated, which means that probably there wasn't a lot of competition between for mates. There wasn't a lot of competition for mates where it was a winner take all situation, because when you have that, you basically have what is that called when you have you end up with extremes like like the antler situation. And there was actually a species of what are the deer? What are those? Anyway, that sort of animal, whether it's a deer or a moose or one of it's probably reindeers, I don't know, but one of those types of antlered animals where they actually went extinct because the competition drove the size of antlers to the point where where the males weren't able to like lift their heads anymore, so they couldn't like graze or do regular stuff to stay alive, and so they just died out. Yeah. And and so those of you who are listening who are creationists and believe that God made all animals perfect, well, there are some arguments against that in that example. So, but the point is that the that human males and human females are similar enough to imply that there wasn't such extreme levels of competition in for mating, either on the male side or on the female side.
So that was the end of part 1 on our discussion of the book Sex at Dawn. So obviously there is a lot more to discuss. The book talks about a lot of stuff really in depth. So we wanted to break the podcast up into 2 different episodes because we wouldn't have been able to do it in one sitting. It would have been like 3 hours of discussion. So to make it a bit easier to digest and to listen to, we split it into 2 parts. So definitely check out the second part, which we will release next week. Thanks for listening, guys.